Hi, welcome to Lit with Lloyd. I am Lloyd, and today we'll be talking to Sam Kabert. And here's what LinkedIn says about Sam. Serial entrepreneur turned spiritual seeker, #1 best-selling author, podcaster. We are delighted to have you here, Sam, and welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Lloyd. I know we've been talking about this for a while, so I'm excited to be here.
Good. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of background. Tell us about you. Tell us about where you grew up, and then we'll get into the actual books that you've written.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Gilroy, so I'm local here. And I went to school at Chico State. And in a lot of ways, I really felt like going to college and the whole college experience and going away Chico, it was like my first real time that I had my first big identity shift, I guess you could say. Really wanted to change from the person that I was growing up, and that's a whole story in itself, but a lot of that comes around my name. And growing up, my name was Sammy. You know, my born name on my birth certificate is Samuel, but I think we mentioned A Boy Named Sue or something like your son's book, right? And this famous Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue, I didn't have like that type of mentality or even know that was a thing, but I had so much self-hate and shame around my name being so soft. And in my junior year of high school, I changed my name to Sam in the school system. And that was kind of like where I first started to really shift my identity. And I always knew like, okay, when I go to college, it's going to be a fresh start. So that's just a little bit of context since you asked about like my background. Then from there in college, I did the whole party thing. I lived above the most popular bar in town. We were top frat, the whole thing. I repped Monster Energy drinks, in addition to a stand-up paddleboard company, anti-hangover company, a spring break company. Like I did the college thing, you know, Chico State, right? So yeah, that was amazing. And I started my first business in college, and that turned into what is now known as Swagworks. We do swag, branded merchandise. And then, yeah, that kind of, that's a little bit of context.
Okay, well, that's great. So your entrepreneurial spirit really started in college.
In some ways, yeah, because my parents own a company called Value Business Products, and they are the last remaining family-owned and operated office supply company in Silicon Valley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I remember growing up, and there was maybe like 30 independently owned, family owned office supply companies, and they're the only ones still around. They used to be right around the corner from the Shark Tank where Andy's pet shop, I believe, still is now. And yeah, both of them, they're entrepreneurs. And then both of their parents, well, I mean, my dad's dad and my mom's dad, my two grandpas, they're both entrepreneurs. And then my great grandfather, who I actually knew till I was maybe around 10 or so, he was an entrepreneur as well. So very much like in the blood. And, you know, growing up in Gilroy, I remember going to the office with them in downtown San Jose and being a kid in the back seat, just kind of like listening in on their conversations when they would talk business, you know. So I had a little bit of context for that. But yeah, my entrepreneurial journey for myself, yeah, that started my senior year of college.
I didn't know that there was an entrepreneurial gene in the families, but evidently that does exist.
Apparently.
Okay. You started a number of businesses. You've written business books. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that first before we get into this book, which I'm very anxious to get into and read. How did you start businesses, and how did they get into books?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I won't, for the sake of time, I won't go into the whole story of Chico Feet, but the first business was called Chico Feet. And yeah, that's a great story in itself, but that transformed into Swagworks now. And then in 2016, I was looking around, you know, to be honest, I had a big chip on my shoulder in Silicon Valley. I felt like, as a guy that sold swag, branded merchandise, and I was doing some office supply stuff for my parents' business as well, it was hard to get respect, like in Silicon Valley, there's the tech startup scene and all that. And it was just a guy selling swag. So I started doing nonprofit work and got on a couple boards of nonprofits. I chaired the Silicon Valley Young Professionals for a number of years. And I started to look around and saw friends and just different people getting into content creation. I was thinking to myself, oh, podcasts, that sounds interesting. So I wanted to do a podcast, but I didn't believe in myself and think I could. Well, luckily, I have two good friends that I give shout outs to in the book. Shout outs to Sergio Oliveira and Palvinder. They are amazing. And I worked with those two guys on the Silicon Valley Young Professionals. Sergio was the guy that had all the relationships and the contacts and the charisma and the charmer. I was the business guy that would get everything organized. And Pal had a company called Playground Studios, and they do amazing video production. So he used to do these short little promo videos. And that's how we got so many people there, because his videos were incredible. So I reached out to those two guys, and I was trying to convince Sergio to do a podcast with me, and then we could have Pal do like all the audio VA stuff, because I didn't know how to do that. AV stuff, I mean. So eventually that came to fruition. That was What Up Silicon Valley, and that was a podcast. And then we relaunched that into a media company where we had 5 different podcasts on the media network. And we also had an annual event at eBay's headquarters called Pitch Tank. It was a Shark Tank inspired event. So that was kind of how I got into content creation. And, people started asking me, how are you able to do so much? And I was like, VAs. And they'd be like, what's a VA? I'm like, virtual assistant? They didn't know. And then all of a sudden I shifted to doing podcasts and blogs about virtual assistants within my own industry, the promotional products industry. I became known as the VA guy. So I just owned that. It wasn't anything I really set out to do. It was just natural. I put out an ebook about virtual assistants. And at that point, I was like, I think I want to write a book, because I always knew I wanted to write a book. But I was like, I could write a book about this and become a thought leader. Like, sure, I'll do that. So I listened to a couple books on how to write a book, took meticulous notes. I wrote the first book, Working with Virtual Assistants. And then I was like, all right, I enjoyed that, and I want to write another. So the next one became The Written Goal. And part of that too, the Written Goal subtitle, I think, is the mindset behind writing down, reading your goals daily, or something like that. I wrote that book in 2018. But part of that too was I could feel myself slipping, because with my career, it was really I was at the peak and I was starting to get complacent. And I've always said I'm the type of sales guy or even entrepreneur that when things are going great, I kind of just coast, whereas the best entrepreneurs and salespeople, they go pedal to the metal. I'm like, no, I want to enjoy this, right? So I felt myself coasting. And I was like, I'm going to write a book for myself, The Written Goal, which is how to achieve your goals, so that if something ever goes wrong or I really need this, I can go back to my formula that works for me. And maybe in the process, I can help some people along the way, and it'll further my own personal brand. From there, I've rebranded my company to Swagworks, and then I was like, might as well write a third book and write about swag. So I did that, and all 3 books, I wrote those in less than 12 months. It was wild. Yeah.
That's crazy. And those are the 3 business books, strictly business books that you wrote, correct?
Yeah, those are all business, yeah.
Okay. How did you promote them? How did you get the word out? And have they been well received?
I didn't promote them. When I listened to, and that's where I fall flat, to be honest. I don't enjoy social media. I don't enjoy promotions or any of that. And that's my own story and something that I have to work on. But I really like creating. And with those books, I listened to that part and I researched how to promote them and do all that. And I was like, I don't want to do all that. Honestly, I did very light promotion. Imagine the minimum you can do for a promotion. That's what I did. I talked about every now and then, whether it was a post or an email blast or, you know, a podcast or something like that. But there was no like goal associated to it to become like a bestseller or anything like that. So those books, like in hindsight, so interesting because that taught me how to write and go through the process and everything. And that's why this book, Soul Life Balance, performed so well and did so well. And I had such a great relationship in writing with it because I had so much experience previously. So it's not like I have judgment against those books not like becoming bestsellers or a lot of people reading them, but it's just interesting to look at in hindsight, you know.
Did you self-publish those 3 books?
All 4 of them are actually self-published. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not quite ready to get into Soul Life Balance, but we'll get to that in a minute.
For sure.
So you wrote your 3 books, you did your entrepreneurial work, and then something hit you where you felt you needed to kind of go in a different direction, keeping the business side there, but going to a spiritual side in you know, joining with that. I'm having trouble speaking. What led you to write Soul Life Balance? And before you tell me that or give me that answer, tell me how did you write it? I mean,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm stumbling. I'm trying to put the right questions to you.
I feel it. Yeah. So I'll answer the first one first, and kind of like some context and background, and then I can get into like the process of writing it. The high level answer to that is in 2018. I got into meditation, and I was talking with an executive of a very well-known tech company, and he was telling me about meditation. At the time, this is 2018, like just a few years ago, I thought of meditation, like I heard different people talking, like influencers talking about meditation, but I still thought of meditation like the 90s Ninja Turtles movie where, you know, the Ninja Turtles were meditating, and I always thought like, oh, that's from that movie, but that's not like a real thing, you know. And then I would hear these high performing achievers on podcasts talking about meditation, and, you know, I was like, whatever, you know. And then this executive was telling me about it, and I got really interested in it. And then I went to a conference, and I spoke on stage in front of a live audience of, I don't know, maybe 300 people or something. It was an entrepreneurial jam. So there was like a panel. I presented like an issue or something I was working through. Then the panelists were to give feedback in front of a live audience. They pretty much like roasted me and were like all over me. And this guy who I hadn't met sent me this long note on Facebook. He was in the audience, and it was just so deep and it was so spiritual, and he was saying a lot of stuff that where I was just like, kind of how your face looks right now, like my jaw dropped. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And
wow.
I met with them afterwards, and then I had a podcast at the time called Brand Hero, and I had him on my podcast, Brand Hero, and he told his whole story. And his story is, his name's Charlie Johnson. He wrote the foreword of this book, and he is the former executive director of the Pay It Forward Foundation, which the movie Pay It Forward is based off of. And he told this incredible story of how when he first left the promotional products industry, and, you know, it was different stuff, he came across this guy that said, "I know you." And the short version is basically this guy told him about how he knew him from like past lives. And Charlie was the same way. I was at that time, like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm intrigued, tell me more. And then he went deep down the meditation path, and Charlie became my meditation like teacher, if you will, and I'd end up doing a transcendental meditation course. But that's how I first really got introduced to the spiritual path, and that was like January of 2018. And then 2019 was a really deep and dark, numbing depression for a variety of reasons. And the plant medicine known as ayahuasca came into my being about a year previously, but then it came back into my life through a form of synchronicities, which I didn't even know what the word synchronicities meant in 2019, that I just couldn't ignore. Just these massive things that would just happen that were the biggest of signs. And I was so low and down that I was like, I will do anything. And ayahuasca is known as one of the most powerful plant medicines. And yes, it's a psychedelic, but this is a ceremony like for healing, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to go shroom in the woods with my buddies, you know?
Right.
So that's how this all started with first meditation, then ayahuasca, had my first really true, profound spiritual awakening experience. And then from there, I had blinders on, went real deep down the path of spirituality. So before I answer like how I went about writing the book, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. We're going to take a quick break.
Cool.
And then we'll be back in just a minute.
Thank you to the Los Gatos Community Foundation for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. Because of groups like the Los Gatos Community Foundation, KCAT has been able to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
Okay, and we are back. We left off at a very significant point where you're telling us what kind of led to you writing the book or getting to a spiritual place. So let's pick up from there. What made you decide to combine spirituality and business? And then I really want to know what the book is about, other than just the title.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of like the awakening experience was just the propaganda of work-life balance and how the conditioning and programming of society, which I went through a whole medicine journey that brought me back to like my youth, where I saw this stuff so clear. And, you know, we come in through this portal that is Earth, through what's known as a veil of forgetting. Like, you know, outside of this dimension, we have all the knowledge, right? But then we go through a veil of forgetting when we come here. But also as children, before all of life's events, everything happens and all that, you're kind of like a clear vessel. So I think a lot of us can see that when we're young. And, you know, for me, I didn't really have good outlets to express that, and I got really into heavy metal and you know, I was angry and stuff like that, and I didn't really know how to express it. So through these ceremonies, I was able to make sense of that and really see like the way that society is run and how like our whole lives are focused around work and work-life balance. Like, yeah, it sounds great in theory, right? And I feel like when I was growing up, I'm 33, especially like in high school and stuff, like it was all the talk, work-life balance, find a career where you're gonna have good work-life balance. And we always talk about that, but at the end of the day, most of our waking hours are spent working. And if you just look at the traditional work week, the 5 days out of 7 we're working. And if you count down the hours, you know, say you're sleeping for 8 hours, which I mean, that's good for most people. If you can get 8 hours, then you're working for another 8, you know, and the other 8, the third, that's either traveling or doing daily stuff. So a large percentage of your life is spent working. Work-life balance, to wrap this up in a bow with it being propaganda, is how we glorify it being weekend warriors. Like, oh, I'm so excited that I have 2 days to actually enjoy my life. How does that make sense at all? Or how we look forward to using our PTO, or pay time off, to go on a vacation, where after coming back from that vacation, we need a vacation from the vacation, or saving up for retirement for that one day. So all that to say, that was like a big part of my awakening experience. And with that is how our language and how we say, oh, my work life or my personal life. No. We're living one life, right? There's only one life you're living right now. There's no work life and personal life. So all this to say really is, I'm trying to invite people to look at their relationship to work as a reframe, instead of work-life balance, as soul-life balance, where work becomes a component of life. And it's no coincidence that suicide rates are at an all-time high that they ever have been. And mental health has been something that I've always been extremely passionate about. And I believe that it's because part of the reason is because we've cut ourselves away from our connection to our higher selves, our soul, from nature and everything like that. So soul life balance, this word soul can be very triggering to some people, just like the word God, right? And what I'd just like to invite people to consider is everyone has an experience. I don't care if you're religious, you're spiritual, you're agnostic, or even you're atheist or anything, right? Everyone has an experience where they're able to express themselves and feel like there's something greater at play going on than just this earthly realm. And if we can connect to that on a daily basis and make that the forefront, then that's really what helps in terms of the mental health of society. I'm not here to recommend like, hey, I have a better way to rebuild the system, because honestly, I don't. And if someone does, that would be amazing. But I do think it first and foremost is going to start with mindset for sure.
All right. Did you put this into practice before you even started to write the book? How so, if you did? Yeah,
it's a great question. So I had the idea of soul life balance pretty much right away. And at the time, I also had a podcast called Mojo Mondays, which was all about productivity and starting your work week off strong and goal setting and all this stuff. And I was like, I'm going to do a season of the Mojo Mondays podcast about spirituality. And then I realized I can't do a season and then go back to like business. Like, this is everything. So that became the Soul Seeker podcast. And the whole concept was about soul life balance and all that. And then I joined a mastermind called Fit for Service, and it's an amazing group. And after being in the program for about 9 months, I started to lead weekly calls for a group of 150 people about soul life balance. There were calls where I got kind of an opportunity to really figure out how this is landing for other people, how I can really best embody it myself, what it means to me. So I've really practiced soul life balance for a number of years prior to writing the book. I knew that I would write a book about it, but it wasn't until July of 2021, over 2 years after I had the first initial idea of the book, that I really was like, I'm ready to write it. Because I went to this yoga retreat, and there's a story there, but basically I realized that I was at the 12th step of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey model, and the 12th and final step is bringing the elixir, bringing the medicine back to the people. So I didn't realize I was doing this. None of this was intentional. This is what happens when you follow your awareness in the signs and synchronicities and stay curious. And in hindsight, you can put the puzzle pieces together. In hindsight, I'm like, all this had to happen. And this cycle of the hero's journey I've been on was this deep dive, so I could really immerse myself into it with blinders so that I could bring it back and package it in a way that makes sense for other people, Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into the book a little bit, it seems to me that you are so incredibly busy. Are you able to actually practice soul life balance?
That's funny, because that goes back to how this podcast started. People ask, how are you able to do so much? And my answer is VAs. Like, honestly, I built up Swagworks to $1 million company while working less than 4 hours a day with no employees, just freelancers. And, I've been saying to my friends the past few weeks that, like, I'm bored, I have nothing but free time. Even when I lived in Campbell, when I lived in Silicon Valley, I had so much free time. And that's part of the reason why I got into content creation. It's really fascinating to me from the outside how I understand how it looks like I'm so busy, but like, if someone were to experience like my life, a day in the life, they would be like, damn, you don't really do that much, like it's just weird, but yeah.
Well, I would ask you what the virtual assistant does, and I might come back to that, but I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about the book. Okay. When did you decide to write it? How long did it take to write? And with something that seems so universal, did you ever think about having a traditional publisher go for it?
Yeah, I did want a traditional publisher. I talked with one of my good friends who happens to be an author coach, and she actually recommended that a better path would be to self-publish, become a number one bestseller, which I was number one bestseller in multiple categories, including the category of the universe. So the number one book in the universe, which is pretty cool if you say it that way, at least. But yeah, so maybe the next one will be a publisher. I actually didn't look into it as much as I could have, but yeah, we'll see. Anyways, to answer your questions, I started writing the book actually, I believe in May of 2021, after I spent a month in Costa Rica. While I was in Costa Rica, actually, I started writing the book, and then I put it down, and then that yoga retreat in July was like, oh yeah, it's time to really do this. Didn't do anything. I think in September or October of 2021, I committed to writing to it. And in 2021, I wasn't home for 4 weeks straight all year. And I kept going on these like different spontaneous trips here and there. I ended up going back to Costa Rica for another month where I did my yoga teacher training. And I was okay with delaying it. You know, my first 3 books, I showed up to them kind of very much in my masculine. When I'm talking about like masculine, feminine, I'm talking about archetypal energy. And the masculine is like structure and do, whereas the feminine is more flow and receptive and intuitive. Yin as soul, as feminine, yang as life and masculine. So the first 3 books, I approached them very much in my masculine. It was like, I'm going to show up every day at this location, at this time. And if I write for 1 minute, essentially write no words, that's fine, because I know other days I could write for a couple hours. And that's what I did for the first 3 books. With this book, I was like, no, I'm going to embody soul life balance, and I'm going to write when I feel called, despite what my author coach told me to do. And it worked out great. I would take notes here and there. It was amazing to be at yoga teacher training for a month in Costa Rica and having deep conversations with other seekers and realizing, oh, when I talk about XYZ, even though I feel like that's obvious because I'm used to my mastermind, kind of like, only hanging out with people that go super, super deep, realizing like, oh, not just the masses might not know this, but even like seekers at the beginning of their journey. So then I would make a note like, oh, this interesting thing would like a despacho ceremony or new and full moon ceremonies, things like that, where I thought like in the spiritual community, like, oh, everyone knows this. But then again, the demographic for the book is someone who is just getting into spirituality, essentially.
Okay. How long did it take you to actually write the book?
I mean, I off and on, so it's hard to say. I don't know how most people do it. I think most authors go this way, at least for this sort of book, but I did several mind maps, and then I would make those mind maps into an outline on a Google Doc, and I would just look at the Google Doc and be like, oh, I feel like writing about this, versus writing in chronological order. It was just what feels most aligned. And I kind of approached it as writing blogs. The average blog is probably like 500 or 750 words, but I've written a lot of blogs that have been closer to 1,000 to 2,000 words. So kind of the way I would approach it is like either writing about a specific subject and or looking at the word count. And it would be like, a hour and a half session here or something like that, and another there. But I was studying flow states as well. It was really important to me to understand how flow states work. And one of the things I didn't know prior to writing the book was that to really re-enter back into a flow state, you want to leave that flow at like 80% capacity. Obviously, these are arbitrary numbers, but before I would go to like 100% where like I'm in flow and like crank it down, keep going even further. And then I would have these massive crashes afterwards. Well, after working with this certified flow coach, they were able to teach me that it wasn't actually a crash, it was a recovery period. And because I was going so deep, my recoveries were longer. So I was able to stay in a flow state longer by not like going too deep and draining that flow state for everything it is and was.
Yeah. Work-life balance, I imagine that there are tons of books about that. Soul life balance, I would think that there aren't that many books. Did you come across a number of other books of a similar nature? It does seem very unique.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Yes, it is unique, and I haven't seen other books frame it in this sort of way. Really, when I initially was thinking about the book, it was going to be an invitation to workaholics that there's something more. And I don't want to say it was going to be surface level, but it was going to be like, you know, not too woo in terms of spirituality. As I started to write the book more and more and more, I put all cards on the table. I put like all my wildest concepts and theories, a human origin story, like all kinds of stuff that like I talk about on my podcast and I've talked about publicly, but is way too far for the initial demographic. And the reason was because the book kind of morphed into an integration book, because I've seen so many people, including myself, just have a rough time with integration after a spiritual awakening experience. So the book really became an integration book. And yeah, there's a lot of books that are like integration, quote unquote, books for spirituality, but none of them really that I know of. There's not many that frame it that way. Yeah. So I'm packaging it differently for sure.
Well, we're just about out of time. I definitely am going to get a hold of this. Thank you for it. Soul Life Balance, people. I think it's something that we definitely want to read. Before we stop, I want to make sure that everybody knows, that all the listeners know, that you were in the Forbes
Silicon Valley, not Forbes.
Oh, I thought it was Forbes.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a bit of a difference, but still a big deal. Yeah. So 40 under 40, right? Is that what it's called?
Right. Yeah.
Tell us very briefly about what year that was and how that happens.
That was 2019. It was just a couple months after I first sat with ayahuasca and was really deep on the path. And that was an amazing experience. And it was kind of the culmination of everything I had been working on, everything in terms of that chip on my shoulder. And I'm very grateful for it.
Okay. Well, I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do a couple of different, 3 different trivia facts for our literary trivia of the day. R.L. Stine, who wrote the Goosebumps series, among other series, has written more children's books than any other author, including J.K. Rowling, 220 million books, and he started it in 1992. He will be 79 this year, and he still writes 2 every month.
That's nuts.
That's nuts, is right.
He wrote 220, not sold.
He sold, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah. I love this one. Dr. Seuss was on a luxury liner with his wife in 1936, and the engine's noise was driving him nuts. And his wife said, "Why don't you write a rhyming book that rhymes with the engine's noises so that it's not bothering you?" And that was his first book that he wrote on the ship. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. And that book was rejected 27 times before Vanguard Publishing decided to take a chance. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
All right, the only other thing I will give you today is Hillary Clinton's memoir, which came out in 2003, sold 200,000 plus copies the first day. It's the largest opening day number of all time,
Wow.
even to the present. That takes care of us for today. I want to thank KCAT TV and Radio for hosting us today. I definitely want to thank Sam for being here. And you can go on Lloyd.show and be able to listen to it. You can go on YouTube. You can go on Lit with Lloyd. I'm all over the place. So if you get a chance to take a listen or take a look, feel free. And that'll take care of us for today. Thank you.
You just heard Lit with Lloyd here on KCAT Radio. Explore all our KCAT original programming at kcat.org/radio.